I'm Dylan Grayson, and welcome to Computational Combat. We're looking at mixed martial arts through the eyes of a betting algorithm, and this week I am all alone. The brains of the operation, Johnny Koppelman, is not here. Real life gets in the way, but I've been sent over some of the data, going to go through everything, make this a quick, short podcast, because there's not really much back and forth discussion to be had. So obviously we went over UFC 254, but last week, a lot of stuff happened. We couldn't make the scheduling work out, couldn't get a podcast out to you, but I am going to break down what the betting algorithm said for last week's Hall versus Silva card. And then obviously the main point, talking about this weekend's card, Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. So UFC 254, not the greatest performance for the algorithm, dropped about $10 on a $33 bet. These things happen. Obviously, we're trying to improve the algorithm every time that we predict a card. And I say we, it's Johnny. I have absolutely no computer skills. It's all him. I'm just here to discuss it. But these things happen. 6 out of the 8 fights were actually called correctly. The only fights that the prediction algorithm got wrong were the Wood versus Kenny fight and the Da Eun Jung versus Sam Alvey fight, which went to a draw. Now, there were 2 different fights on that card where the predictions algorithm and the betting algorithm differed. They did value plays where they thought the underdog had more of a chance than the book was giving them, so they thought it was worth betting on. And obviously, those didn't come through, especially Justin Gaethje did not come through against Khabib Nurmagomedov. I'm going to save discussions about Khabib Nurmagomedov's retirement because it's 2 weeks out. You've heard it before. And I'm also going to save discussions about the controversial comments Khabib made after his retirement because, once again, it's been a while. You've probably already heard it. And this isn't a politics podcast. This is a nice little break from thinking about politics, which has absorbed a lot of my energy this week. So last week, the card was Uriah Hall versus Anderson Silva and what was supposedly Anderson Silva's retirement fight. How did that one go? So it churned out predictions on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fights. Correctly called Sean Strickland against Jack Marshman. Incorrectly called Bobby Green versus Thiago Moises. And then I have no idea what was going on here, but the algorithm picked Maurice Green, the crochet boss, against Greg Hardy. I don't know if the statistics weren't exactly indicative of their talent as fighters, and that's not to bash Maurice Green, but Greg Hardy just has this significant athletic advantage. Maurice Green's last fight before this was a win by submission, but if you actually watched it, it was a little bit disappointing. It probably shouldn't have gone down the way it did. The fact that he was able to pull off a submission from there is simultaneously both impressive and depressing. So I really think that the algorithm saw something in the numbers that it couldn't have seen from actually watching these guys fight. But of course, that fight did not go Maurice Green's way. The algorithm correctly called Bryce Mitchell beating Andre Fili and Uriah Hall defeating Anderson Silva. So after those losses on week 1, we made back $7.81 on $47.58 of a total bet. So when we discuss betting on this podcast in terms of predictions, we simplify it by saying as if you had $100 to bet, because everything's turned out to us in percentages. I don't know exactly how much is in the account because, once again, I'm not the guy running the computer system, but it's not $100. So that doesn't mean we bet 47% of our fund on that card, just to clear things up. So moving into the actual important discussion here, this weekend's fights, Thiago Santos and Glover Teixeira in the main event. We've got 5 different fights that have been predicted by the algorithm. The rest, the algorithm left alone, did not make a call. So I haven't seen the results here. They've been sent to me, but I've purposely been keeping them out of my view. So at the bottom, Trevin Giles versus Bevan Lewis. I think that Trevin Giles has had more difficult opponents than Bevan Lewis, and I think he's had better wins. And I think Trevin Giles should get the win here. Taking a quick peek at what the algorithm says, let's figure out. So we've got Trevin Giles predicted with 74.81% accuracy. So if these guys fought 100 times, the algorithm expects Trevin Giles to win 75 times out of those 100 hypothetical matchups. I definitely agree with that. Moving on, Ian Heinisch versus Brendan Allen. Saw Brendan Allen fight live once. It was when he defeated Kevin Holland by submission. That was, of course, Kevin Holland's last loss in the UFC before he's gone on a bit of a tear. But I feel that Ian Heinisch is going to win this fight. I think besides the Kevin Holland win for Brendan Allen, Ian Heinisch has the better wins, and he is a bigger, stronger fighter. And I think his wrestling may be able to outdo Brendan Allen's work on the ground. Taking a peek at the algorithm agrees with me, 77% for Ian Heinisch. That might be a little bit high in terms of the predictive value there, but I do agree with the general consensus. Moving on, Hayoni Barcelos versus Khalid Taha. I don't have much to go off of here. I'm not going to give an opinion simply because I'm not super familiar with these fighters and I don't want to say something that ends up being incorrect about these guys. But the algorithm gives it to Hayoni Barcelos 61%. So if these guys fought 100 times, the algorithm predicts that 61 times out of that 100, Hayoni Barcelos is your winner. Moving on, Andrei Arlovsky versus Tanner Boser at heavyweight. This one seems pretty cut and dry to me. Tanner Boser has had some really good wins in the UFC. His only loss to Cyril Gane, who seems to be a very good prospect. And while Arlovsky is coming off of a win, I believe, his first in a while, I still have the feeling that Arlovsky is washed. And it's, sad to see a fighter overstay their welcome. But I think Andrei Arlovsky is well past the peak of his career. Obviously, that's not controversial at all. I think he is no longer a valid contender in the heavyweight division. And I think that Tanner Boser is going to win this fight. So Andrei Arlovsky's last win was against Felipe Lins, who Tanner Boser also has his last win against. Felipe Lins lost to Andrei Arlovsky by decision and then came back to fight a few weeks later and then got knocked out by Tanner Boser. I think that Tanner Boser is going to win this, and it wouldn't surprise me if he knocked out Andrei Arlovsky. And looking at the algorithm here, the algorithm picks Andrei Arlovsky with just 55%. So we saw about 55% on the Green versus Hardy fight as well. I'm wondering if this is another thing where there's this huge backlog of statistics with Andrei Arlovsky, and maybe the algorithm hasn't perfectly weighed out the fact that he's not as good as he used to be. Obviously, the algorithm takes everything into account across all fighters. So the algorithm is going to understand that fighters tend to decline as they age, but maybe that needs to be manually weighted higher or something. I'm not exactly sure, but I disagree with the algorithm here. I think Tanner Boser should win this fight. Then moving on to the main event, light heavyweight division, Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. This could be for a title shot. It's reasonable that the winner of this fight would get the next shot at the winner of Jan Blachowicz versus Israel Adesanya, which Blachowicz versus Adesanya sounds like such a fun fight to me. And as a fan, I hope that Israel Adesanya wins that. I think I'd love to see him as a double champ, even though it does clog up divisions. I'm just a huge, unapologetic Israel Adesanya fan. So I think this fight should go to Thiago Santos. Glover Teixeira has looked very good recently, but Thiago Santos, in his last performance, in my personal opinion, I believe he beat Jon Jones. Obviously, the judges didn't call it that way. A lot of fans online thought that he had beaten Jon Jones, adding in the fact that he had torn multiple ligaments in his knee in the first round and continued to fight on and perform as well as he did. I think that was actually a very impressive performance for Santos. He's obviously been out a long, long time, but I don't see him losing to Glover Teixeira here. I think he's faster. I think he hits harder. And I think Glover Teixeira's only path to victory is by taking it to the ground and either implementing his jiu-jitsu or just retaining control for ground and pound. but I do see Thiago Santos winning, and looking at the algorithm, Thiago Santos is your winner, 66.96%. So 67 times out of 100, if these guys hypothetically fought 100 times, that's what you would get. Thiago Santos, your winner, based on the algorithm. So I think that the algorithm made some pretty good picks here. And by that, I mean, I feel pretty good in my picks up against the algorithm. The only one I'm not seeing is Andrei Arlovsky. I don't know what's going on there, but let's look at the actual betting. So if you were to hypothetically have $100 that you were willing to bet, the algorithm suggests that you bet $2.50, 2.5% of the fund on Andrei Arlovsky. It suggests a bet of $1.25 on Khalid Taha. So this is one of those value plays. It called the fight for Raoni Barcelos, but it believes that Khalid Taha has excess value to what the books are showing. So it's betting against its own prediction here in hopes that should it come out on top, you will gain enough money to offset that probability of losing. Then it bets $3.75 each on Ian Heinisch and Trevin Giles. But despite what we saw in terms of the prediction, it didn't actually put out any bets for Santos versus Teixeira. So either that means that it doesn't like the values that are being shown in the book, or it feels like it will be relatively close, or some combination of the two. Considering 2/3 of the time it predicts Thiago Santos to win, I'm assuming that it thinks that Thiago Santos is being overvalued in the books and it doesn't want to pull a value play on Teixeira. So that's a quick look at the last few cards and this upcoming UFC card. Next week, hopefully everything will be back to normal. I'll have Johnny on with me and we will break down the entire card rather than doing a short form, one person rambling at his computer screen podcast like this. But making the most of it. It's a crazy week. And hopefully next time we talk, we'll be a few dollars richer.